Good afternoon, good afternoon. People are slowly joining, they're in the room. Welcome everyone. Some people enjoying the beautiful weather outside. That's great. Feel free to have your videos on or off as you want. I'm Professor Kiran Jayaram. I'm at least for another couple of weeks, the chair of the occasional lecture series in the Department of Anthropology. And we have a committee that has been working on this. This lecture series is basically to share anthropological approaches to important topics with the community, and also to put a spotlight on some of the important work that our colleagues in the department and perhaps later across the university and through our professional networks are doing. So today we have Professor Christian Wells and Professor Heather O'Leary, and they're going to be talking about, because it's April 22nd, it's not just Charles Mingus's birthday, that great jazz bassist, pianist, composer, poet, writer extraordinaire. It's not just his birthday, but it is also Earth Day. And so because of that, they will be talking about water. And so thank you all for being here. So the structure is that Professor Wells will talk, then Professor O'Leary. They may have some comments for each other. I might throw in a comment or two, and then at that point, everyone can join in and ask questions, give comments, and it will be more of an open dialogue at that point. So thanks very much. At this point, I turn over to Professor Wells.
Well, hello, everybody. How are you? Don't be shy. You can turn on those cameras. Or not. Everyone likes to stay hidden. It's always good to see people. My students in my undergrad class never turn their cameras on. I don't want to see their bedrooms, but you know, who knows? Well, it's nice to see some of you. Thanks very much for coming. I didn't realize that it was Earth Day until a couple of days ago. So now I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I know why you scheduled it on this day now, Kieran. So I guess the topic here was we're talking about water. And I have a few slides that I pulled from a previous presentation. I didn't make them for this, don't worry. But I thought, you know, just as a way to introduce the kind of research that I do on water and the research team. Let's see. All right, I just turned the chat on. So if you have questions during this presentation, go ahead and put them in the chat. And I'll try to respond to them as I do. But anyway, I thought I would talk a little bit about the research that my research team and I have been doing over the past 10 years or so on water. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. O'Leary, and she'll have some comments. And then we can just take it from there. So here is a very nervous attempt to share my screen. But the host has disabled my sharing of the screen. Come on, host. Okay.
I've made you the host, so that way you can now share screens.
I am the host now. Awesome. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen. Everybody see this okay? Awesome. So the research that I do is organized by a research center that I direct called the Center for Brownfields Research and Redevelopment at USF. And for those of you unfamiliar with the term brownfield, it's simply a property that's been polluted or contaminated in some way, or people in the neighborhood think that it's polluted or contaminated in some way. And the goal of this research center really is to help communities turn these brownfields into what we call health fields. So instead of redeveloping the property into another pawn shop or liquor store or fast food joint. We are looking for redevelopment into federally qualified health centers or community gardens or something of that nature. Recreational parks are very popular. So anyway, our mission is to leverage all of this interdisciplinary expertise at USF for outcome-driven research on environmental toxicants, whether they be in the soil or the water, land use legacies, the consequences, for example, of urban planning, community health, environmental justice, and sustainable and equitable development. I'm gonna figure out, there we go. So for the past 10 years or so, we've been doing this research in conjunction with environmental engineers and public health practitioners at USF. A lot of this work that we've discovered in terms of redevelopment in communities, the sort of the foundation or the bedrock is water and sanitation and hygiene infrastructure and access. And so we've been doing a lot of work with water and sanitation over the years. And so our three big areas of our research center are the fundamental research. And for this, we've been developing an atlas of environmental justice communities throughout the state of Florida with funding from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but really it's an online decision support tool to identify communities that have contaminated properties, that have very high rates of poverty, for example, and that have water and sanitation infrastructure challenges. We also work in redevelopment sector, and we've been funded by NSF and the EPA for a number of years, mostly working around the university area community. This is, for those of you on the Tampa campus, this is about 1,000 feet from the social sciences building over behind where Target is, that kind of community over there to the northwest of USF. It's a really interesting community because it looks like when you're driving down Fletcher that you're in the city of Tampa, but it's actually an unincorporated county. The city doesn't want to incorporate it because the tax base is too low and the challenges of redevelopment are too high. And so people don't have access to water and sanitation infrastructure. They don't have sidewalks, they don't have streetlights. There are a lot of challenges right next to USF. We've been working in that area a lot. And then finally, education. We've been doing a lot of work with developing an environmental workforce development and job training program with our partners at the CDC of Tampa and East Tampa. And right now, this week, we're in our 4th week of our first cohort, where we're training 60 residents, unemployed and underemployed residents of East Tampa, in hazardous waste management and environmental cleanup skills so they can get jobs in the remediation industry. So just going back to our main research area, it often begins with this redevelopment atlas that we've created for the state of Florida. And you can get to it from our website at usf.edu/brownfields. And it allows you to sort of zoom in on the community that you might live in or work in Florida and learn everything about it. We have all of the information available from the Department of Environmental Protection and the US EPA. We have American Community Survey data, and we have a lot of new data about jobs and redevelopment, taxes, property values, and water and sanitation infrastructure. So you can really get a total sense, a really holistic sense of community needs from this development atlas. And it's allowed us, for example, to identify a number of what we call environmental justice communities in Florida. And so these, particularly the ones in red that are rated at the highest levels of vulnerability, is where we've focused a lot of our work in redevelopment over the years. So a lot of this work has, again, precipitated by working with environmental engineers. And we've worked on a large NSF collaborative project, abbreviated HWISE. It stands for Household Water Security. And it's a collaborative of a lot of different universities that are looking at water, household water and sanitation insecurity. And we've realized that a lot of what we know about water and sanitation insecurity in terms of theory and in terms of case studies comes from low HDI countries in the global south, and that there's very little research, ethnographic research on high-income economies and water and sanitation challenges in high-income economies. And so this collaborative is really turned toward trying to understand why that's the case and how we can partner with these communities for positive kinds of interventions. And in doing this, we've come up with a concept that we call the myth of modern water. Modern water is really something that's developed because of science and engineering expertise, advanced water treatment capacity, public policy and regulatory oversight, but it's produced this set of what we refer to as neoliberal ideas and discourses and practices that are associated with Western science and engineering that imagines water as clean and safe and trustworthy and affordable and uniformly governed. And there's also this sense of a universalizing discourse for high-income economies, meaning that for a lot of people in high-income economies like the United States, for example, many people believe that everyone has access to water and that the water is good if you're on the grid, as they say. And we also note that this exemplifies political ideals of liberal models of governance and especially citizenship, or what some anthropologists have called hydraulic citizenship, that underpins designs and universal prescriptions of infrastructure development. But as anthropologists and geographers and sociologists on this bigger NSF collaborative, we have noticed, through our ethnographic research, that kind of abstraction of water separates it from its broader social and cultural and political context, and that water and sanitation insecurity in that way is not randomly distributed, but it's politically decided. And so we've been sort of rallying around a concept of infrastructural violence, and we refer to it as the ways in which infrastructure constitutes the channels for structural violence while materializing power relations. And of course, some of you are familiar with the concept that was popularized by Paul Farmer's work in Haiti that he referred to as structural violence. And if you go back to some of his early writings and the early development of Partners in Health, you can see that the very cornerstone of that concept actually came from early interventions in water and sanitation. And he believed in his work in Conge, for example, that you can't address public health issues until people have clean water and access to sanitation. And so this idea of infrastructural violence is very central to that early kind of talking about notions of structural violence. So I just wanted to give a couple of quick local examples in Tampa that we've been working on, because some of you might be familiar in the Tampa Bay area with some of these neighborhoods. One example that we've been working on is mapping environmental justice and infrastructural violence in Tampa. And we've done this, this is work that my former graduate student, Matt Bahungu, and our good colleague, a PhD candidate in environmental engineering, Noha Abdel Motaleb, has been working on. And they've created a series of indices, quantitative indices that take into account environmental vulnerabilities and social vulnerabilities and water infrastructure and water infrastructure vulnerabilities. And so we've been producing, for example, GIS maps using this Brownfield atlas to look at where poverty levels are especially high and to create these vulnerability indices within the area, not just for social aspects, but for environmental aspects too, considering flooding, for example, the locations of hazardous waste throughout communities, and then also looking at water infrastructure vulnerability in terms of pressurized pipes, co-location of infrastructure, and a variety of things. So when you overlap these all in GIS, you can start to get a sense of where to look for infrastructural violence in Tampa. And you can see, perhaps not surprisingly, you might start at the port and go up through Ybor and East Tampa, connecting with the university area community. And those are areas that have social, environmental, and water infrastructure vulnerabilities. There's some in West Tampa too. And you can see, maybe not surprising, south of Kennedy and Soho and all those great neighborhoods down in South Tampa and McDill, you don't have the same kinds of place-based and water infrastructure vulnerabilities that mostly Black and brown communities in the East Tampa area experience. So we want to move from maps to action. And so we've been working with our graduate students to ground truth water and sanitation insecurity in a lot of these communities. And we do that through The activities of the Brownfield Center, we do it through an environmental justice seminar that I teach, which I'm teaching in the fall. If anyone wants to join us, we'll be doing this work in the fall. But we want to promote the work of environmental justice by leveraging students' skills and their privileged access to resources like time and computers and data and access to scholarship to really facilitate community identified agendas and efforts. And the greater goal is to instill within students a critical environmental justice consciousness. That's a perspective and an awareness that give consistent attention to the histories of inequality and processes of marginalization that produce environmental injustice and infrastructural violence. And we do that in anthropology on these three pillars of applied work and outcome-driven research, holism, multivocality, and equitability in terms of development. So just a couple of quick examples. Matt Wahungu worked with Maya Trotz, for example, in environmental engineering to look at water and sanitation concerns in the neighborhood of Sulphur Springs. And they did a lot of different ethnographic methods to try to understand people's perceptions and lived realities of working in water and sanitation insecure households in the area. And I don't have much time, so I'm gonna just say that we can come back to this if people have questions. And more recently, we've been building on some work of master's students, Chris Ann Hines, who did a lot of work on flooding in the university area community, and Gabby Lehigh. And now, more recent master's student, Abby Vidmar, who's going to be spending this summer doing research in the UAC on plumbing poverty. And she's going to be doing that in the context of an NSF REU, where we have undergraduates coming from all over the US to help document ethnographically people's experiences with water and sanitation. Just some of our preliminary results in talking with people in this community. There's a real heavy reliance on bottled water for drinking and bathing because of concerns about tap water quality. One person we spoke with said, my tap water is always brown and smells. Another woman we spoke with said, our babies get UTIs from bathing in contaminated water. Somebody else says, my water tastes like chemicals. We've documented dermatitis and skin rashes from people taking showers. This is the university area community that is, I mentioned, an unincorporated community. Not really part of the city of Tampa, but it looks like it. And there are just numerous challenges because some people are on the grid, the water service provision from the city of Tampa, and some people have wells and have on-site wastewater treatment like septic tanks and leach fields. And because of regulatory undersight in unincorporated county, sometimes those septic tanks and leach fields are located very close to people's well water. And so there are concerns about microbial contamination because of that. Some issues, again, with sanitation, a lot of sewage backups from people that are on city sewer. And then as Chris Ann Hines documented in her thesis, a lot of problems with flooding. This is a very low-lying area that's susceptible to flooding. It used to be an area filled with environmental features that would absorb water and flooding, wetlands kind of features, but that's been interrupted by urban development. And so now you get a lot of standing water when there's heavy rains. And then all the problems that come from standing water. There was a number of concerns, for example, a few years ago with Zika and mosquito outbreaks during this. There's also a lot of mold that sticks around afterward. Just a number of problems that people have. So we're starting to take sort of a one water or one wash approach and looking at not just the interrelationship between water and sanitation, but also flooding. It's the same substance, it's just located in different places and it causes different problems for people. And in fact, that's something interesting that Abby is going to be looking at is how the interdependency between water and sanitation infrastructure produces or catalyzes insecurity, water and sanitation insecurity. So it's the interdependence between infrastructures that can create vulnerabilities. All right, I've spoken too much, I'm sorry. I will leave it at that and just say thank you. And there's my email if you want to get in touch and get involved. Again, we're going to be doing this research all summer, depending on COVID, I don't know. And then also the EJ seminar this fall, where we're actually working with another community up at the base of the Panhandle, Port St. Joe, where a Superfund site has developed. Superfund is like really bad contamination. It's associated with a paper mill that recently closed. And a lot of people are having a lot of water and sanitation problems because of that, those kinds of contamination. So anyway, please reach out if you have any questions, and we can have some conversation later. All right. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Wells. And so I'm going to then quickly turn this over to Professor O'Leary. And I will make you host so you can share stuff too.
Can you guys see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay, great. So far, it doesn't look like it's in present mode for me. Okay, here we go. All right, so I really ran with Dr. Wells's description of this word, modern water. It's something that I've been flirting with in my new book that I'm writing. So I'm going to share a work in progress with you. It's a little bit of an excerpt from my book. And I tried to enmesh it with enough context so that you understand my research. So I work in Delhi, India, where Janvi was one of the first girls to grab my hand at the water tanker drop-off point. As she pulled me over the tangled hoses and jumbled clusters of repurposed vessels, her sing-song voice beckoned me with an invitation to help her with her daily chores. Come, she giggled sassily, let's carry the water buckets we filled at the truck back home. Janvi's daily task of hand carrying 100% of her family's household water was typical to the neighborhood, but the politics spiraled outward. Ultimately, it was dependent on the flow of water through her country, region, city, the millions of turns water takes as it coursed through clouds, glaciers, aquifers, rivers, dams, sluices, purifying plants, pipes, tankers, faucets, buckets, and individuals' hands. It was physical, material, but also socio-political. Calculated investments into infrastructures, institutions, and information systems had been made to keep Delhi on the path towards water security and through it, development. I've been honored to track water among families like Janvi's with ethnographic fieldwork over the past 15 years through funding from Fulbright, Wenner-Gren, the US Department of Education, and others. Janvi's water work was at once similar to and aberrant from her forebears. Every day there were new ideas about how to leverage water in the right ways. These prescriptions were written all over Janvi and every other Delhiite from head to toe, across skin, under fingernails, between pores, and filling every cell of her body. Janvi was proud of her water work and her role as a major player in her family's future. She asks, how else will we become middle class? Like so many others in Delhi's development basti or slum informal tenement communities, to say nothing of the millions aspiring to upward mobility worldwide, Janvi often described how she was determined to make her own future. And strategic water use allowed the water poor to essentially look the part, a material purity signaling a family status through class-based access to developed water infrastructures. In every house, down every lane, people thirsted to demonstrate their achievement of the Indian dream. Janvi, like Lychee's description of middle-class Nepali youth, was stuck in a consumption-oriented interstitial nowhere place, seemingly between a South Asian cultural context denoted by the past and promise of global modernity. But unlike them, Janvi had to defend her upward mobility and self-worth through a relationship with water long before secondary markers of class. Janvi and the aspiring middle class must at once use modern water, like the quantities and the quality markers, while being defined by a lack of access. In this model, access to water is necessary to create the middle class aesthetic of the good life. In other words, water becomes the key to social distinction. Bourdieu theorized at length that class distinction is really a process of demonstrating high class aesthetics and developing disgust for the aesthetics of lower classes. This entails not only receiving middle class water access, but also the work of producing middle class water aesthetics while shunning lower class water, despite having only these limited water accesses. So thus class is a process. It's not something given, but something to be done. It's not a matter of leaders received, but also what you labor to demonstrate with those leaders. The labor by which class is reproduced is a social, material, and symbolic sort of labor, not merely an empty acultural necessity, as modern water sometimes is theorized to be. This labor is bound and facilitated by water. By ascribing to notions of purity, John B. contributes to a pattern of cultural hegemony that reproduces the socio-cultural values of the urban and international elite and the dramatic desiccation of her nation. The global cases of resource insecurity are mounting and the numbers are staggering. By 2050, 70% of the world's population is predicted to live in cities, with most of the absolute growth in Asia, a region where the urban population is already facing debilitating difficulties with inadequate infrastructures. Critical urban services like water and sanitation are indeed struggling to keep up. In one of my interviews with the head of the National Ministry of Water Resources in India, he said that and this is a couple of years ago, he said that in order to catch up with population growth, Delhi would immediately need to build water infrastructure the size of the city of Chicago's, not once, but 10 times. And that was just to make up for the population gap that year. 1,000 new immigrants arrive every day before COVID. So that gives you an idea of the scale. Critical urban services like water and sanitation are struggling indeed. Yet interventions rarely adequately couple both the material and the cultural variance in development schemes in cities in the global South, and their marginalized citizens remain objects of development, as objects of concern, or as trainable partners in brighter futures. All too often, development is measured through these markers of modern water achievement. As modern water mapped itself onto pre-existing politically charged ideas of purity and the vernacular, we can think about purity and local flavor. So the idea that water became a streamlined modern substance is very compelling. And we hear that voice strongest from Jamie Linton. And indeed, water fundamentally changed as people redefined it as a tool that had to meet global standards of quantity and purity. Prescient, Linton's landmark hypothesis establishes modern water as a uniform ideal that silenced other meanings. But Linton's process was not identical in all places around the world. His theory about homogenizing water essentially homogenizes the development process too, and reduces the dialogue between local cases. The cultural history of India, its cities and people demonstrate that the path to modern water can easily take a different route. This difference ultimately establishes that even modern water has multiple meanings. In Delhi, modern water mapped itself onto the pre-existing politically charged ideas about purity and the vernacular. As water increasingly becomes a tool for humans, two infrastructural changes lock in the new cultural ideal of water devoid of a vernacular taste. The first are purification infrastructures. And you can see two household infrastructures here in the picture. On the counter, you see a plastic water distribution device and then a clay pot sitting next to it, which was also used for keeping the water clean, pure, and cold. Purification infrastructures occur at every scale, from Delhi's peri-urban Sonia Vihar filtration plant, the reverse osmosis machines that hum in kitchens, the fine mesh screens on the faucets, and the rag filters sewn by Janvi and her neighbors. These homogenize water, methodically removing both what it used to hold and its specific local context. No one can taste the languid flavors of the dry season, nor see the evidence of the yamana floating in a glass. Second are truncations. Water no longer looks like a substance flowing through a system. Instead of drawing water by hand while gazing knee-deep at the ever-changing snake-like Yamuna River, one's gaze goes no further than one can reach. One twists a faucet or dips in a cup. Truncation happens everywhere in the city and is a sign of privilege. Water storage tanks in Delhi's middle-class spaces are relegated to rooftops. Neighborhood pipes are tucked under streets, building a metal and plastic clay riverscape that hovers just above and lurks just below the mundane plane of human existence. In Delhi and around the world, these technologies act to dislocate water from tongue to source, truncating the everyday observation of our interconnected wet web. The infrastructural changes reinforce the cultural values that erect them. In this tautology, we're left with a deeper sense that water should be a tasteless substance, void of context in its composition and its delivery. But again, these changes are not simply top-down cultural prescriptions. Instead, the ways in which modern water took hold in urban India demonstrates that the process revolves around multiple senses of purity. These ideas about purity, though framed as universal, apolitical, and acultural, are tied in with imposed social hierarchies of water practices, promoting the notion that there are uncivilized, uncultured, distasteful people who have not yet learned to use water properly. They drink dirty water. They don't wash properly. They don't understand water science. They don't know about the water cycle and or understand that the water crisis is real. They thank the gods, not the state, for water. These are all things that I recorded from informants. In this context, everything except modern water culture is judged as wrong, backward, and incorrect. Even if water practices are sustainable, vernacular practices that do not conform to the ideals of developed water are shunned. What is at stake in the current politics of water with no taste? The material and conceptual limitations on water effectively limit the pathways to understanding, equity, and innovation. When water is forced to conform to one of many cultural permutations in its conceptual and its material purity, its rigid infrastructures, its unidirectional models, it silences water's multivocal, dynamic, polysemous potentialities. All of these limitations contribute to an epistemic cleansing of epic scale. When the ways of knowing water are limited, so are the options for problem solving. Moreover, many realities of water are externalized in models of human water relations, which create false understandings of the ways we can manage conflict and its multiple dimensions. Epistemic cleansing can be observed in Delhi, where the water realities of the majority of the population is overlooked, minimized, or deliberately quashed. Few approach Delhi's waterscape from the point of view of the urban poor, and even those who do focus on the historical dynamics of autonomy and authority in lieu of exploring the nuances of water as a substantial cultural phenomenon. Under colonialism and today's neoliberalism, which is sometimes dubbed neocolonialism, local cultural water management was deemed uncivilized, and it was the responsibility of the Europeans to educate the locals as to what was proper. We see this sometimes manifesting as Europeans saying that their wastewater sluices should be different than the people who were living in India, saying essentially that their shit was too clean to mingle with the shit of people living in India. So neocolonial infrastructure proliferation followed the lines of social hierarchy. Improvements to systems and institutional protections favored the elite. The infrastructural legacy of hydraulic colonialism still stripes many global nodes of colonial trade. Today's cities built themselves around the crumbling pipelines of yesterday's prejudices. Pipes and water flows didn't just stratify the neighborhoods occupying this multicultural city. Water became a conduit to new identities within the family. As families modernized, the retention of a national identity grew, revolving around new ideas of cultural purity. While post-colonial India positioned itself as a democratic, secular, and developed nation, the responsibilities of modernization were divided by gender. As fathers specialized in looking outward for their families, mothers and homes provided a firm cultural anchor in the masala that kept their children Indian. The typical family model designated fathers as providing global influence for their children, comfortable in transnational workspaces that would be English medium, secular, and non-familial. This new identity uses water to reproduce. As fathers adopted Western work week, which they attended in their universal uniform of slacks, collared shirts, and closed-toe shoes, water was critical for daily self-presentation to meet these new material standards. Hair freshly washed, feet soaped and rinsed before putting on socks, and all the thirsty garments washed and pressed. In contrast, mothers became vernacular specialists. This included speaking in the mother tongue vernacular of their region, wearing Indian dress, whether it's a sari or kurta pajama, tied in the regional fashion, cooking multi-generational trusted Indian recipes, holding traditional values, and devote religious conviction. Yet their water management was not to be traditional. Women were required to demonstrate modern techniques to accommodate the changing family, their bodies, and their belongings. The home became a place of celebration for the motherland, while the public sphere was streamlined for the appeal to a global patriarchy. And Delhi's water bent itself to this end. New perspectives of materialism seek to make sense of the social dimensions of things and how things inform our sociality. Can we define ourselves through its relation to the greater system of our bodies and ourselves? Surely, when we explore medical anthropology and disability studies, we understand how corporeal dysfunction or other functionings can define our selfhoods and our identity. Does a dead limb have agency over a live human? Can a lung demonstrate class? What about a body that's been compromised due to structural violences when environmental justice is not metered out for all? In my ethnographic research in Delhi, surely a digestive tract had a class. Exposures to polluted water, microbes that are invited to live within, a part of co-constitutive of human host bodies that are enhanced and encumbered. Does Delhi belly carry a class? A global traveler might think so, since it's framed as an intrusion of the local foreign into the pure world-class body. Any slum dweller who has canceled days of work from digestive issues would agree. But the class designation would be on the other end of the spectrum. Does the water that populates my cells have agency, since I cannot move without it? It is not enough to know how water flows through different social waterscapes. It is time to reimagine the concepts and relationships that challenge our understandings of both water and our hydro selves. As a result, water is no longer a neutral object or a use-centered commodity or natural resource over which people jockey for authority. The exhausting work of cultural negotiation of modern water permeates multiple scales, from national debates to household disputes. In my experience, most invigorating are those rousing debates when citizens react to intrusions by government into their bathrooms, or the ways everyday people read large dam politics through the lens of the water buckets sitting outside their kitchens. Domestic water is fluid, volatile. It does not conform to standard categories of cultural negotiation. It splashes over everything. The rhetorical project of establishing the dominance of context-free water, or modern water, can be read in parallel to the construction of the calorie as the precursor to the Green Revolution. By disassociating water from its other values, water could become a quantifiable, interchangeable unit, rendering different cultural values moot. Even sterile, acultural modern water can be read as a cultural artifact. However, water is much more than an object. When understanding water through the lens of culture, it becomes evident that people make water as much as water makes them. This is to say that water is in socio-material conversation with humans. Water is a social product to which we assign values, beliefs, and practices. And critically, water is a process. It becomes the process that shapes humans through its interactions with us. Every physical adaptation, every social interaction was shaped because of water. Thus, humans become a watery artifact.
All right. Well, thank you both for wonderful presentations. Do you have any comments or questions for each other? While you're thinking about that, I just wanted to, I'll let that just kind of simmer for a second. I did want to remark that it was great that Professor Wells, you mentioned that course that you're teaching in the fall. Just wanted to put a point on that. And that there's a possibility for student involvement with research. So if people are interested, make sure to follow up with him about that. So please go ahead.
I'll add that I have research opportunities in the EcoFem Lab, which typically accepts virtual participation from everybody, but we do a lot of content analysis and coding for probably, we've got 11 active projects right now and a vibrant lab of over 13 participants. And I'll make a plug for my class, which is called Reimagining Capitalism, where we look at the UN's triple bottom line of people, planet, prosperity, and explore the ways in which in local Florida cases, as well as global cases, people are trying to hit that bottom line.
I have a quick question for Heather. When you were describing the waterscape as a cultural construction, and water as a cultural construction, it reminded me of some folks that have been writing about what they call the urban sanitation imaginary. Is that something that, I don't know, I just feel like it's part of what you're describing, because it's not just the way that people experience water in that context, but how they think they should experience it, you know, how they imagine it versus how it is maybe, you know, actually how they're interacting with it.
Yeah, that certainly resonates with the things that I do. I wonder if Vinay Gidwani is a part of that group discussing it, but I find it to be really fascinating because the water before people sitting right in front of them is often imagined in such a different way than what it actually is. And you can hear through those descriptions these deeply rooted conceptions of what it means to be a part of India's development and where one senses oneself. So it's a deeply subjective activity.
Yeah. The other thing that really resonated about what you were saying is the parallels between you know, purity as part of modernity, but also thinking about the role of purification infrastructure, not just as part of modernity, but also as infrastructure that mediates the relationship between people and the state, and how that process creates citizenship or creates publics, and so on. So I thought I never, you know, singled out purification infrastructure as part of this broader thing, but it just made me think about that. And I don't mean Publix as in Publix the grocery store.
Yeah, to me, it's really fascinating. You can even read, oh, what is his name? He writes on whiteness and American politics. He's a historian in New York, but his book, Clean and White, is really extraordinary in tracking this notion of who belongs to the US and what constitutes being a proper citizen based on what types of like washing and purification you and your culture are known for. And so he, as a historian, he's gone into lots of different archives and pulled up all of the old advertisements, including one where, you know, there's, this is like in the era of slavery and a baby gets dropped into a wooden bucket of water and then the soap is used and emerges as this like Nordic looking baby. And then compares that to how this sentiment is still nefariously alive in our everyday life by showing us a Dove commercial. You know, I've seen a Dove commercial in the last 5 years where there's a woman who starts out as a pretty deep complexioned African-American, and the tagline of the soap is good for every type of skin. And she pulls off her shirt and then it's a different brown person under there. And then the last scene is a white lady as she reveals her shirt. And so it's pretty mind-blowing that we still have all of this symbolism in something as simple as soap and water. So we examine stuff like that in the EcoFem lab too. We like to unpack advertisements and comments on social media.
Well, at this point, we have about 15 minutes left. Does anyone in the audience have questions or comments for either of the speakers? We have that comment in the chat by Mr. Pentilla that the colonial pathologies by Warwick Anderson talks about contamination and like cleanliness in a colonial landscape. Could be related to this discussion.
I had a question about Dr. Wells, the research in the university area community. When you're talking about infrastructural violence and being an unincorporated community that does not have standardized water infrastructure that is governed by the county, what are some examples of other places, if you know, that have had also a similar unincorporated governance structure that have successfully come up with strategies to deal with infrastructure violence related to their water quality?
Success stories, that's a great question. I don't know. I just know a lot about the problems. You know, and these are not just in unincorporated communities or in urban areas like in Flint, Michigan, but we're seeing, you know, greater diversity of populations subject to this kind of infrastructural violence. Probably the epitome would be unhoused and unsheltered people. But there are also communities, informal settlements like colonias in South Texas, or rural areas in North Carolina, or of course, indigenous and First Nations communities and reservations that have really lack access to water and sanitation. So I know very few success stories where people have, you know, managed to negotiate, you know, better water access. But in the few cases that I do, it's always political. It's always about power imbalances. And it's not really about the infrastructure itself, but it's about who uses that infrastructure. And so it's in that way, it's always very hegemonic.
It's a great question. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Are there others? Comments, questions, concerns, points of clarification? Mr. Pentilla has something for Dr. Wells. The vulnerability index seems to match to an extent the redlining maps of Tampa. Is this something that may be true in other US cities?
Yeah, this new initiatives around and out of the US EPA, the redlining maps that have been produced and distributed recently are really interesting. These are historical maps, a lot of historical data by historians where you can see redlining efforts and the consequences, the long-term consequences of redlining. And so, you know, as those data become available, we can start to incorporate them better into the vulnerability indices and things that we're doing. But yeah, there's no surprise that there's a strong overlap between redlining and infrastructural consequences of redlining 20, 30, 40, 50 years later.
Very good. Others? We have a
Come on,
link.
Chris Ann, I know you have a question.
There's a link in the chat.
I mean, you explained my project so well. I can't think of any other questions. I mean, maybe did they actually add in those sidewalks that we've been promised for a few years now? How's the status of that going?
Yeah, so, you know, an unincorporated county, you get on a capital improvement plan and then those budgets change annually. So we're still waiting for those sidewalks. We're still waiting for floodwater management infrastructure, still waiting. It's been really interesting working in an unincorporated community that's on the edge of a metropolitan area, because when people have challenges, you know, they go to the county and say, you know, these are the problems that I have. And the county says, well, you're in the water service provision zone of the city, so you need to talk to the city. So they talk to the city and the city says, no, you're in unincorporated county and you're not on the grid, so you have to talk to the county. And it's just a ping pong back and forth. And, you know, we've got residents that are working 2-3 shifts. They don't have time to deal with this. And you have a lot of people that are, that don't have legal documentation to live in the US, and they don't want to call attention to any problems that they have because they don't want ICE visiting them. And so there are these broader structural issues that silence people and their ability to advocate for themselves. So it's been a real challenge working in this area.
The same with my research community, which is sort of like located in this interstitial spot. Delhi needs migrant workers, and they need, you know, everyday people to do a lot of the work that keeps the city running. Yet they don't want to take responsibility for providing adequate housing or transportation from the outskirts of the city. And so these urban villages pop up, and then there's not a direct line of recourse. And in bureaucratic systems, that's exactly the function that you need. And so when you feel illegal and when the city is threatening to bulldoze your home every single day, you keep your head down.
Heather, how does your work overlap with, or does it, like Anand's work and a lot of other people that have been doing a lot of work in Mumbai?
Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest differences is that Nikhil really looks at things from like the infrastructural and the engineer's perspective. One of the main things that my work brings to the conversation is this notion of gendered environmental labor. Which ranges from like intellectual labor all the way down to like the manual labor, and this sense that at every scale, women's labor and marginalized people's labor in making this gleaming, washed, clean city is completely overlooked. And this isn't like a sad victim's tale. There's a lot of heartache in it, but I think that what the most incredible thing that I've learned from my fieldwork there is that if we stopped to properly account for the epistemic values of water and how they're culturally changing as new people are inculcated in the ways to use water of the city, we see that there's lots of pushback. And we see that there are lots of interesting solutions to problems of urban water that go beyond just, you know, I'm going to use less. And so I think that by recognizing these citizens more or less as collaborators and informed stakeholders who are maybe you know, at the leading edge of what urban sustainability could be like, I think that there's a vast amount of knowledge that that we need to, as anthropologists and as water advocates, explore. So one really fascinating thing is that when you're hauling in all of the milliliters and liters, you know, like 80 milliliter buckets sometimes, just like 10-year-olds are carrying those. You know how much water you use for every chore. And people would estimate, and I did an experiment where I would, measure the water that they use to wash their clothes or to wash their dishes. And they were spot on. Like, they were really within milliliters sometimes of what they actually used. And since I primarily work with domestic workers, when they would go to this other modern water sort of situation in the middle class homes in which they were employed to earn like $2, $1 a day for 8 hours of manual labor, they would just turn the faucet. And even though there wasn't 24/7 pressure going through the pipes of Delhi, the tanker on the roof made it seem that way. And so they had to readjust to not only the values of how much you needed to use to be deemed clean in this new middle class sense of the word clean and what is proper, but also to like the physical material reality of water literally slipping through your fingers. And so when I asked how much water did you use to wash the dishes that day, wild estimations and wild divergences from reality. So it's really fascinating to me how people can gauge amounts or can really imbue lots of like extraordinarily rich ideas about a certain kind of water, and then when it comes to the other kind, be completely like bamboozled, Yeah,
it's interesting. People have written about the physical distanciation, but also the social distance created by infrastructure between people and where your water comes from. Mm-hmm. And the farther that distance gets socially and physically, the more it changes your morality and your connection to water.
Yeah, that resonates with like Harvey and Massey and all that. Yeah, spatial geographies, literature. Yeah. Got a lot more to say on that, but I'll not take us down a 30-minute rabbit hole.
Do you also find gendered differences in the way that people imagine purity and pollution around water?
Definitely. But I think that more or less, I always still read that through the ways it's used. That's why labor is so central to the work that I do, because when people are speaking specifically about water, it's sometimes harder for them. And because of, in my field site especially, there's been so much intervention by the government, by NGOs, by transnational corporations to try and like stamp their seal of this is our cause, that when you ask somebody specifically about the purity of water, they know the party line. But when you talk about the ways in which you use it and what is possible by using it, then that's where you find the richness and the vibrance of these cultural values.
Well, I wanted to thank you both for your presentation. I want to thank the audience for showing up on this Thursday afternoon. If you're in the Tampa area, it's a beautiful afternoon. I hope you get a chance to go out and enjoy this Earth Day or Mingus birthday, whichever you're celebrating, or both. So this is the occasional lecture series. We'll have another one tomorrow, actually, with Professors Baer and Mahoney and students from one of their anthropology classes, talking about COVID politics and student experiences and their undergraduate student research at 2 p.m. And so that link, I think whatever link you used in the email, there should be the link to that lecture tomorrow. So I invite you all to show up to that. Thank you very much. I appreciate all coming here, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks very much, Q.
Thanks for having me.